Part 3, Chapter 4, Crime and Punishment. Just then the door opened quietly, and a certain young girl entered the room, looking timidly around her. They all turned towards her in surprise and curiosity. It took Raskolnikov a glance or two before he recognized her. This was Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova. He had seen her the evening before, but such had been the moment, the surroundings, and her manner of dress that his memory had retained the image of someone very different. Now she was modestly and even poorly dressed, and she looked very young, almost like a little girl, with a modest and demure manner and a clear but rather frightened-looking face. She was wearing a very plain little house dress, and on her head there was an old-fashioned bonnet of a kind that is no longer worn. The only item of yesterday's costume was the parasol, which she held in one hand. I think it's, Marmeladov's daughter. Having suddenly realized that the room was full of people, she was less embarrassed and completely at a loss, as intimidated as a small child, and she even made a movement as if to go away again. "Oh, it's you," Raskolnikov said, extremely surprised, and was suddenly himself thrown off balance. It immediately occurred to him that his mother and sister must already have picked up some knowledge in passing from Lucin's letter about an unmarried woman of immoral conduct. Only just now he had been protesting against Lucin's slanderous remarks, mentioning that he had seen the woman for the first time on the day in question. And now here she was. He remembered, too, that he had raised no protest against Lucin's use of the expression of immoral conduct. All this slipped through his head obscurely in an instant. Giving her a closer look, however, he suddenly perceived that this humiliated creature was so humble that he felt sorry for her. And when she made that movement to flee in terror, something in him seemed to turn over. "I wasn't expecting you at all," he said hurriedly, stopping her with his gaze. "Please be so good as to sit down. I expect you've come from Katerina Ivanovna." "No, not over here. Please sit there." When Sonia had come in, Razumikin, who was sitting on one of Raskolnikov's 3 chairs right beside the door, had got up in order to allow her into the room. At first, Raskolnikov had been about to ask her to sit down in the corner of the sofa where Zazimov had sat, but reflecting that this sofa was rather too familiar a spot, as it served him as a bed, he hastily directed her to Razumikin's chair. "And you sit here," he said to Razumikin, motioning to him to sit down in the corner Zazimov had occupied. Sonia sat down, almost shivering with terror, and gave the 2 ladies a timid look. It was evident that she herself had not the faintest idea of how she could possibly have sat down beside them. Having pondered this, she grew so frightened that she suddenly got up again and in complete confusion turned to Raskolnikov. I've only dropped in for a moment. Forgive me for disturbing you," she said falteringly. "I've come from Katerina Ivanovna. There was no one else she could send. She told me to say that she would be very glad if you would come to the funeral tomorrow morning for the service at the Mitrofaniev Cemetery, and then to her home afterwards to take some food. You will be doing her an honor. She told me to ask you." Sonia faltered and was silent. "I'll certainly see if I can, certainly," Raskolnikov replied, who had also got up and was also faltering, his sentence unfinished. "Look, do me the favor of sitting down," he said suddenly. "I want to talk to you, please. I know you're probably in a hurry, but do me this favor and give me 2 minutes of your time." And he moved up a chair for her. Sonia again sat down, again gave the 2 ladies a quick look of timid embarrassment, and suddenly lowered her gaze. Raskolnikov's pale face flushed. He seemed to convulse all over. His eyes caught fire. "Mother," he said firmly and insistently, "this is Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova, the daughter of poor Mr. Marmeladov, the man whom I saw run down by the horses yesterday and whom I've already told you about." Pulcheria Alexandrovna, Raskolnikov's mom, glanced at Sonia and narrowed her eyes at her slightly. In spite of all her confusion before Radia's insistent and challenging stare, she could on no account deny herself the satisfaction. Dunya, his sister, had battened her gaze earnestly and directly on the poor girl's face and was examining her with perplexity. On hearing the introduction, Sonia looked up again, but this time grew even more embarrassed. "What I wanted to ask you," Raskolnikov said, turning to her, "is how you've managed to cope with things today. Have you had any trouble from the police, for example?" "No, sir. It all went. It's only too plain to see what caused his death. No one's given us any trouble except the other lodgers. They're angry with us." "Why?" "Because the body's lying out too long. It's so hot just now. There's a smell, so they're taking it to the cemetery today before Vespers to lie in the chapel until tomorrow. Katerina Ivanovna didn't want them to at first, but now she sees herself, it won't do. So they're moving it today, are they?" "Yes, and she wants you to do us the honor of coming to the funeral service in the church tomorrow and then attending the funeral repast at her home." "She's arranging the funeral repast?" "Yes, sir, some kakuski. She told me to thank you very much for coming to our assistance yesterday. If it hadn't been for you, we never ever been able to find the money to bury him." Both her lips and her chin suddenly began to dance, but she mastered and restrained herself, quickly lowering her eyes to the ground again. During the course of their conversation, Raskolnikov studied her fixedly. This was a thin, very thin and pale little face, rather irregular and sharp, with a sharp, small nose and chin. One could certainly not have called her pretty, but on the other hand, her blue eyes were so clear, and when they grew animated, the expression of her face became so kind and open-hearted that one felt oneself involuntarily drawn to her. There was about her face, moreover, as about all the rest of her, one peculiar distinguishing feature. In spite of her 18 years, she still looked more or less like a little girl, far younger than she was, almost a complete child, and occasionally in some of her movements this made itself almost absurdly evident. But can Katerina Ivanovna really manage all this on such limited means? She's even planning Sakuski? Raskolnikov asked, insistently continuing the conversation. "Well, the coffin's to be a simple one, sir, and the whole thing will be simple, so it won't cost much. Katerina Ivanovna and I worked it all out earlier on so that there would be enough left for a meal in his memory. And Katerina Ivanovna very much wants there to be one. One can't herd that consolation. That's the way she is, sir. You know her. One can't herd that consolation. That's the way she is, sir. You know. I understand. Of course. Why are you staring at my room like that? You know, my mother says it looks like a coffin." "Well, you gave us all the money you had yesterday," Sonia said suddenly by way of reply in a kind of loud, hurried whisper, and then with equal suddenness lowered her eyes as far as she could. Her lips and chin began to dance again. Ever since she had come in, she had been struck by Raskolnikov's impoverished surroundings, and now these words broke from her suddenly of their own accord. A silence ensued. Dunya's eyes brightened a little, and Pulcheria Alexandrovna even gave Sonia a friendly look. "Radia," she said, getting up, "it goes without saying that we'll have dinner together. Come along, Dunya, and you ought to go out for a bit of a walk, Radia. After that, have rest. Lie down for a while, and then come to us as soon as you can. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll have tired you out." Yes, I'll come," he replied, getting up and starting to bustle about. "Actually, there's some business I have to attend to." "I say, you're not going to have dinner on your own, are you?" Razumikin exclaimed, looking at Raskolnikov in astonishment. "What are you up to?" Yes, I'll come. Don't worry. Anyway, I want you to stay for a minute. After all, you don't need him right now, do you, Mother? Or am I perhaps depriving you of him?" "Oh, no. Now then, Dmitri Prokofitch, you will come and dine with us too, won't you?" "Please do," Dunya said entreatingly. Razumikin bowed, beaming all over. For a moment they all suddenly grew strangely embarrassed. "Goodbye, Radia, or rather until we meet. I don't like saying goodbye. Goodbye, Nastasia." "Oh, there, I said it again." Raskolnikov's mother, Pulcheria, intended to bow to Sonia as well, but somehow failed to get around to it and made a bustled exit from the room. Avdotya, the sister, on the other hand, had evidently been awaiting her turn, and as she walked past Sonia in the wake of her mother, made her an attentive, polite, and completely formed bow. Sonia grew flustered, bowed back in a hurried, frightened sort of way, and a look of pain appeared in her features as though she found Raskolnikov's sister, Avdotya, politeness and attention distressful and tormenting. "Goodbye, Dunya," Raskolnikov shouted when they were already out on the stairs. "Give me your hand." "But I've already given it to you, remember?" Dunya replied, turning around to face him affectionately and awkwardly. "Never mind, let me have it again." And he squeezed her fingers tightly. Dunya smiled at him, blushed quickly, extricated her hand from his, and followed her mother downstairs, also for some reason thoroughly happy. "Well, there's a glorious thought," he said to Sonia as he came back to his room, giving her a bright look. "May the Lord grant rest to the souls of the dead, and let life be the realm of the living." "That's right, isn't it? Isn't it? Don't you think so?" Sonia looked at his suddenly brightened features with positive wonderment. For a few split seconds she stared at her silently, or for a few split seconds he stared at her silently and fixedly. At that moment, all the things her dead father had told him about her suddenly passed through his memory. "Oh, good heavens, Dunechka," the mother said as soon as they were out in the street. "Why, I really think I'm glad we left. I feel easier somehow. While I must say that as I sat in the train, I never dreamt I would feel this sort of relief. I tell you again, Mother, he's still very ill. Can't you see it? And maybe that worrying about us has upset him. We must try to be tolerant, and then we'll be able to forgive him a great, great many things." "Well, you haven't been doing very well at being tolerant, have you?" Pulcheria Alexandrovna, the mother, at once interrupted with fervid jealousy. "You know, Dunya, I was watching you both just now. You're the complete likeness of him, not so much in your features as in your soul. You're both melancholics, both gloomy and liable to flare up, both overweening and both generous. It couldn't just be that he's an egoist, Dunechka. Eh? When I think of what may happen at our lodgings this evening, my heart stops beating. Don't worry yourself, Mother. What will be, will be. Dunechka, but just think of the situation we're in now. What if Pyotr Petrovich withdraws his suit?" Poor Pulcheria Alexandrovna suddenly said incautiously. "And what would he be worth after that?" Dunya replied sharply and contemptuously. "We did the right thing in leaving just now," Pulcheria, the mother, broke in at once, quickly. "He was hurrying off somewhere on business. Let him get out and do some walking, breathe some air. It's horribly stuffy in that place of his. Though where's he going to find air here? These streets are just like rooms without ventilators. God, what a town. Wait, look out, you'll be crushed. Those people are carrying something. Why, it's a piano they're carrying, I do believe. How they're pushing one another. That young lady makes me very frightened." "What young lady, Mother?" "That one, that Sofia Semyonova, who was with us just now." "Why, I have a sort of premonition, Dunya. Believe it or not, as soon as she walked in just then, I thought, she's at the bottom of it all." She's not at the bottom of anything," Dunya exclaimed in vexation. "Oh, you and your premonitions, Mother. He only met her yesterday, and when she walked in just now, he didn't even recognize her." "Well, you wait and see. She worries me. You'll see, you'll see. And what a fright she gave me, looking at me with those eyes of hers. I could hardly stay in my chair. Do you remember when he started to introduce her? And I find it strange that Pyotr Petrovich should have written the way he did about her in his letter, yet he introduced her to us and to you as well. That means he must be attached to her." "Oh, he writes all sorts of things. He said them about us, too, and put them in his letters to people. Or have you forgotten? I'm sure she's perfectly all right, and that all these things you're saying are nonsense. I hope to God you're right. And Pyotr Petrovich is a worthless gossip monger," Dunya suddenly snapped out. Pulcheria Alexandrovna fairly wilted. The conversation broke off. I can't believe she said that, but she's going to marry that guy. "Look, this is what I want to talk to you about," Raskolnikov said, drawing Razumikin over to the window. "So I'll tell Katerina Ivanovna you're coming," Sonia said quickly, bowing in order to leave. Just one moment, Sofia Semyonova. We have no secrets. You're not intruding on us. There are a couple other things I'd like to say to you. Look, he said suddenly, not finishing his sentence and turning back to Razumikin as though tearing himself away. You know that fellow, what's his name? Porfiry Petrovich? I should think I do. He's a relative of mine. Why do you ask about him? Razumikin added with a small explosion of curiosity. Well, yesterday you said that he's in charge of this case, this murder business. Yes, and? You said he'd been questioning the people who pawned things with the old woman. Well, I pawned some stuff with her too. Oh, just rubbish. But there was a ring of my sister's which she gave me as a keepsake when I left for St. Petersburg, and a silver watch that belonged to my mother, or a silver watch that belonged to my father. They're worth no more than 5 or 6 rubles in all, but they're precious to me for memories they contain. So now what am I to do? I don't want to lose the objects, particularly the watch. I was terribly afraid that mother might ask to have a look at it when we began talking about Dunechka's watch. It's the only thing of my father's that's left in the family. She'll make herself ill if it gets lost. Women. So what am I to do? Tell me. I know I ought to go to the police station, but wouldn't it be better if I just went to see Porfiry, eh? What do you think? I want to get the matter sorted out quickly. You'll see. Mother will ask me for that watch before dinner. On no account go to the police station, and by all means go and see Porfiry, Razumikin exclaimed in a state of uncommon excitement. Oh, what a relief. Hang it all. Let's go there now. It's only a couple of yards away. We're sure to find him in. Very likely. Yes, let's. And I'll be very, very, very pleased to meet you. I've told him a lot of things about you at various times. I was talking to him about you just yesterday. Come on. So you knew the old woman, did you? Aha. So you knew the old woman, did you? Aha. This is all turning out most marvelously. Ah, yes, Sofia Ivanovna. Sofia Semyonova, Raskolnikov said, correcting him. Sofia Semyonova. This is my friend Razumikin, and he's a good man. If you have to go now, Sonia began, not looking at Razumikin at all and becoming even more embarrassed as a result. Come on, let's be off, Raskolnikov said decisively. I shall come and see you today, Sofia Semyonova, only you'll have to tell me where you live. He was less disconcerted than in a kind of hurry, and he avoided her gaze. Sonia gave him her address, blushing as she did so. They all went out together. Don't you bother to lock your door, asked Razumikin. Don't you bother to lock your door? Asked Razumikin, coming down the stairs after him. Never, actually. I've been meaning to buy a lock these past 2 years, he added casually. The people who have nothing to lock up are the happy ones, aren't they? He said, turning to Sonia and laughing. When they got outside, they stopped at the gates. Is it off to the right you go, Sofia Semyonova? Incidentally, how did you manage to find me? He asked in a way that suggested he really wanted to say something quite different to her. He kept wanting to look into her clear, quiet eyes, and this aim somehow kept eluding him. Oh, you gave Polechka your address yesterday. Polya, ah yes, Polechka, that little girl, she's your sister, so I gave her my address, did I? Do you really not remember? Yes, I do. And I heard about you from my poor dead father that time, only I didn't know your name then, and neither did he. I came here today, and since I'd found out your name yesterday, I asked, does Mr. Raskolnikov live here? Not knowing that you were a lodger, too. Goodbye, sir. I'll tell Katerina Ivanovna. She was immensely relieved to have finally got away. She hurried off with her eyes lowered, anxious to get out of their sight, to cover those 20 yards as quickly as possible, and then turn along the street to the right and be at last on her own. And then, as she walked on her way, making haste, not looking at anyone, paying no attention to anything, to think, remembering, considering each word that had been spoken, each circumstance of the situation, never had she experienced anything like this before. An entire new world had settled mysteriously and dimly on her soul. She suddenly remembered that Raskolnikov had said he would come to see her today, perhaps this very morning, perhaps right now. Oh, not today, please not today, she murmured with a trembling of her heart, as if she were imploring someone like a child that is frightened. Oh, merciful Lord, to my lodgings, to that room, he'll see, oh, merciful Lord. And so it was hardly surprising that she failed to notice a certain gentleman, not of her acquaintance, who at that moment had his gaze assiduously fixed upon her and was following close on her heels. He had been following her ever since she had emerged from the gateway, just as all three of them, Razumikin, Raskolnikov, and herself, had stopped for a couple of words on the pavement This passerby had suddenly seemed to give a start as he made his way round them, and, in so doing, unexpectedly caught Sonia's words. I asked, "Does Mr. Raskolnikov live here?" Quickly but attentively he examined all three, in particular Raskolnikov, to whom Sonia had been speaking. Then he looked at the building and seemed to make a note of it. All this had happened within the space of an instant. On the move, and the passerby, desirous of remaining unnoticed, had walked on, slowing his pace and apparently waiting for something. What he was waiting for was Sonia. He had realized that they were saying goodbye to one another and that Sonia was just about to return to wherever it was she lived. I wonder where that is. I'm sure I've seen that face before, he thought as he recalled Sonia's features. I must find out. When he reached the turning, he crossed to the other side of the street, swung around, and observed that Sonia was now coming along the same way he had come, oblivious to everything. Sure enough, upon reaching the same turning, she entered the street in which he stood. He set off after her, keeping his eyes fixed on her from the opposite pavement. Having gone some 50 yards or so, he crossed back to the side of the street along which Sonia was making her way, caught her up, and began to walk behind her at a distance of about 5 paces. He was a man of around 50, of somewhat above average height, with broad, perpendicular shoulders that gave him a slightly stooping appearance. He was dressed in stylish comfort and looked like a portly aristocrat. In one of his hands he held an elegant walking stick, which he tapped on the pavement with each step he took, and those hands wore freshly laundered gloves. His broad, high cheekbone face was pleasant enough, and its complexion was a fresh one of a kind one does not often encounter in St. Petersburg. His hair, still very thick, was entirely blonde, with the merest hint of gray here and there, and his wide, thick beard, which descended in a square, shovel shape, was even fairer than the hair of his head. His eyes were blue and had a cold, fixed, and reflective look. His lips were bright red. All in all, he was a remarkably well-preserved man, who looked much younger than his years. When Sonia came out onto the canal, they found themselves together on the pavement. As he watched her, he had time to note her pensive distracted air. On reaching the building where she lived, Sonia turned in at the gates, and he walked in after her, somewhat surprised. Entering the courtyard, she turned right towards that corner of it which housed the entrance of the staircase that led up to her lodgings. Aha, muttered the unknown aristocrat, and began to make his way up the stairs behind her. Only then did Sonia notice him. She reached the 3rd floor, turned off down the connecting passage, and rang the doorbell of apartment number 9, on the door of which was chalked, Kapernaumov, Taylor. Aha, the stranger said again, surprised by the odd coincidence, and rang the bell of apartment number 8 next door. The 2 doors were some 6 yards distance from each other. You live at Kapernaum's, he said, looking at Sonia and laughing. He altered a waistcoat for me yesterday. Well, I live here next door to you, in the home of Madame Reslich, Gertruda Karlovna, you know, such is fate. Sonia gave him a close look. We're neighbors, he went on in a voice that was for some reason particularly cheerful. I mean, I've been in town for 3 days. Well, goodbye for now. Sonia did not reply. The door opened and she slipped through to her room. For some reason she felt ashamed, and she even looked frightened. I think it's Pyotr Petrovich. As they made their way to Porfiry's, Razumikin was in an especially excited frame of mind. This is marvelous, brother, he said several times. How relieved I am. What are you so relieved at? Raskolnikov wondered to himself. I mean, I had no idea you'd also pawn things with the old woman. And So now we're at the paragraph with Raskolnikov and Razumikin talking. They're going to go see that guy Porfiry. It's supposed to be related to Razumikin. As they made their way to Porphyry's, Razumikin was in an especially excited frame of mind. "This is marvelous, brother," he said several times. How relieved I am." "What are you so relieved at?" Raskolnikov wondered to himself. "I mean, I had no idea you also pawned things with the old woman. And how long ago was this? I mean, how long ago was it that you went to see her?" What a naive fool, Raskolnikov thought. "Now, when was it?" he said out loud, pausing as he tried to remember. "Yes, I think I went to see her about 3 days before she died. By the way, I'm not going there in order to redeem the objects now." He interposed with a special kind of hurried concern about the objects. "I mean, I've only got 1 ruble in silver to my name, all because of that damn delirium I had yesterday." As he mentioned the delirium, he made his voice sound particularly emphatic. Yes, Razumikin agreed hurriedly and for no apparent reason. "And that's why you were so taken aback, so to speak. And even in your delirium, you kept going on about some rings and chains and things. Yes, it all makes sense now. So that's it," Raskolnikov thought. "That's how far that idea has worked its way among them. I mean, this man will go to Calvary for my sake, yet even he's thoroughly relieved that it's been cleared up why I kept mentioning those rings when I was delirious. That's the kind of hold it's got on them all." "But will he be in?" he asked suddenly. He will, Razumikin hurried to reassure him. "He's a marvelous fellow, brother, you'll see. He's a bit clumsy. Oh, he's a man of the world, all right, but I mean clumsy in another sense. He's a clever chap with a lot of common sense. Even only he has a rather peculiar cast of mind. He's suspicious, a skeptic, a cynic, a skeptic, a cynic. He's like to hoodwink people, or he likes to hoodwink people. Oh, I don't really mean hoodwink. It's more that he likes to make fools of them, the old material method. And he knows his job. Oh, he knows it, all right. There was one case he cleared up last year concerning a murder in which nearly all the clues had been lost. He's very, very, very anxious to make your acquaintance." "Why all the verys?" "Oh, it's not that he just recently, you see, when you were ill, I often and repeatedly found myself mentioning you while he used to listen. And when he found out that you're in the law faculty and are unable to finish your course because of your financial circumstances, he said, 'What a pity.' And I concluded, well, taking it all together, I mean, it wasn't just that. There's something else as well. Yesterday, Zamyotov, look, Radia, I said a lot of silly things to you when I was drunk yesterday and we were going home. And well, brother, I'm scared you may have blown them up out of all proportion, you see." "What's all this about? You mean this business about them thinking I'm insane? Well, perhaps they're right." He smiled a thin, ironic smile. Yes, damn it, I mean no. Why, everything I said, including whatever I said about that other business, was all nonsense and the result of my hangover." "Oh, why do you keep apologizing? I'm getting really fed up with all this," Raskolnikov shouted with exaggerated irritability. He was indeed to a certain extent pretending. I know, I understand. Please believe me, I understand. I'm even ashamed to talk about it." "Well, don't then." They both fell silent. Razumikin was in a state bordering up ecstasy, and Raskolnikov sensed this with disgust. He was also alarmed by the things Razumikin had just said about Porphyry. "I'll have to complain about my lot to this fellow, too," he thought, turning pale, his heart thumping, and make it sound natural. The most natural thing would be to say nothing at all along those lines. Make damn sure I don't say anything, no, but that would also be unnatural. Well, we'll soon see how things turn out when we get there. It is a good thing I'm going there, or isn't it? Is it a good thing I'm going there, or isn't it? The moth flies to the candle flame of its own accord. My heart is thumping, that's the worst of it. I think he's just thinking this. "It's this great building," Razumikin said. "What matters most of all is whether Porphyry knows I went to that old witch's apartment yesterday and asked about the blood. I must find that out immediately, right at the start, as soon as I go in. Find it out by the expression on his face. Otherwise, I'm done for." "You know what, brother?" he said suddenly, turning to Razumikin with a mischievous smile. "I've noticed that ever since this morning you've been in a state of extraordinary excitement. True?" "What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about." Razumikin winced. "No, brother, that's no good. It's too obvious. You were sitting on your chair back there just now in a way you never normally do. You were sitting right on the edge of it, and you kept having minor convulsions. You jumped to your feet for no apparent reason. One minute you were angry, and the next your ugly mug would mysteriously turn as sweet as toffee. You even blushed, especially when they asked you to dinner. You turned horribly red." "I never did. That's nonsense. What are you driving at, anyway? For heaven's sake, you're cringing like a schoolboy." My God, there he is, blushing again. Oh, you are a swine. What are you so embarrassed about, Romeo? You just wait. I'll tell a few people about this today. Ha ha ha. I'll make mother laugh and someone else as well. Listen, listen, listen. I mean, this is serious. I mean, this is... What are you trying to say, you devil? Razumikin said in confusion, turning cold with horror. What will you tell them? You know, brother, what a swine you are. I think he's making fun of him that he has a crush on his sister. Like a rose in springtime, and how it suits you. If only you knew. A Romeo 7 feet tall. I say, you have washed yourself nicely today. Cleaned your fingernails, eh? I've never known you to do that before. My God, you've even pomaded your hair. Come on, let me see. Bend down. Swine. Raskolnikov was laughing so hard that it seemed he would never stop, and thus it was with laughter that they entered Porfiry Petrovich's apartment. That was what Raskolnikov had wanted. From the rooms within it could be heard that they had been laughing as they came in, and were still guffawing, 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 as they stood in the entrance hall. Not another word in here, or I'll smash your skull, Razumikin whispered in fury, seizing Raskolnikov by the shoulder. So that's the end of Part 3, Chapter 4. It's pretty funny by Raskolnikov. Pretty clever, but... So every time they keep talking about it, oh, what are they trying to insinuate? I'm crazy? No, they're suspicious that he might be the murderer, which he is, but... I don't think he's that dumb. Peace.